if you could give your introduction at this belated stage. Thank you.
Sure. Let me start off very quickly about the present, so the 90-hour conflict that just took place. It's actually more or less matches a very standard pattern now in India and Pakistan. Under the Modi government, this is the third time this has happened. And we've had previous such instances going back to the Manmohan Singh government, the Vajpayee government before that, where in effect, there is a terrorist action or militant action inside India. India then blames Pakistan for supporting whoever did it, responds either militarily, in some cases nowadays through actual military airstrikes inside Pakistan, though it sometimes has happened in 2002 through mobilization, basically forcing Pakistan, because of a smaller economy, to be penalized for what it sees as a support for a terror action. Then the two sides basically have a number of different ways to confront each other. So I said nowadays it's mainly kinetic airstrikes, but in the past, as I said, has been a sort of grinding action on the artillery fire on the front. But then they run into a basic problem. They're both nuclear armed. So there's no question of a final battle or anybody actually winning this in the end. So once you begin to enter some sort of a nuclear threshold, it either brings in international intervention or the two sides sit down and work out some way in which they can both declare victory and walk away. This more or less has happened again in this case. It's still a bit of fog of war, exactly what's happened on the ground.
Both sides are definitely claiming victory. I've been reading.
Yeah, and which is fine. I mean, there's actually an article in Foreign Policy by Ravi Agarwal, which makes the argument that that's actually probably a good thing, that you could actually declare victory, that between both countries having reasonably solid controls in their social media spinning, as well as the fact that they both have nuclear weapons and therefore they're in no position to actually defeat the other. I think, but is there anything different this time than it was in the past? I think a couple of points that I'd make. One is the disparity between India and Pakistan now is quite sharp. In the 1990s, Pakistan's GDP is about 1/3 of India's. Today, it's about 1/10, if not 1/11. Or to put it in other ways, the GDP of Pakistan is the same size, or actually smaller than the city of Mumbai by itself. This in turn is reflected in the size of their defense expenditure. Pakistan's defense spending is now 1/10 of India's. That still doesn't change the nuclear element of it, but it means India is now much more prepared to hit back in a more damaging military fashion than it was before, because it knows on the conventional side, what was traditionally a set of preponderance is now one of overwhelming dominance in terms of aircraft and tanks and so on and so forth. The second part, I think that's also different in this case, and we saw very similar to what we saw in Ukraine and other modern warfare, virtually no land action whatsoever. This was purely aerial. Everything was about drones and missiles. The first day was a little bit of air combat. After that, fighter combat, but after that, it was just drones, missiles. And it became, as one military attache from another third country told me, said it was basically an air defense battle. Whose air defense would last longer before they'd be eventually overwhelmed by the sheer number of projectiles coming through and knocking each out. And broadly, I think the consensus is India got the edge by this third or fourth day, simply by sheer numbers, and maybe a slightly superior technology, though that's harder to tell. And then eventually leading to Pakistan, and you can see the New York Times article gets a bit of that right, I think, where Pakistan starts to fear that its nuclear deterrent is under attack because the cruise missiles India was using were so long, the longest range that we've ever had before, basically hitting bases like Nur Khan and so on, deep inside Pakistan, used to be considered impregnable. Pakistan then goes to the United States, says, you got to stop this. And a Trump administration, which initially had said there are no American interests in this war, we don't care, felt, I think, well, that was J.D. Vance's position. Rubio, the Secretary of State, felt that he had to move in. brokered a very basic compromise, led to a ceasefire, which both sides have agreed. One of the questions is, will the ceasefire hold? I think yes. India, basically, in its first attack on May 7th, when it carried out attacks on the terrorist groups that had sites that it believed were responsible for the April Pahalgam attack in Kashmir, had at that point said, we have essentially accomplished our goals, which is punitive action against groups that are responsible. Pakistan obviously said that that's not going to, we just can't sit down and accept you being able to attack into our sovereign territory, killing, as Pakistan claimed, 31 civilian casualties, and expect us to just stop there. But India is very clear this is over as far as we are concerned. And I believe I was talking to an Indian senior Indian official. He said our position was we stop when you stop, we fire only if you fire back. And the exchange went on all the way up until the 10th, when I said the air defense problems started to creep in on the Pakistani side, and the nuclear element seems to have started to come in. Indian government insists there was no nuclear element, having conventional superiority. I presume that would be a position they would take. But effectively, once Pakistan accepted the ceasefire agreement, India didn't really have a problem in doing the same. So I think for neither side is there much of an incentive to take this further, because as you enter that nuclear threshold, you're basically running out of options here. Neither side is prepared to go down the land side in terms of combat, and there was the strike corps, the giant armored infantry units just didn't move forward even 1 inch. They just stayed where they were. Clearly indicating a desire, but neither was interested in territorial capture or anything major. Most of the attacks were on military targets, on military bases, air bases, and so on. Again, no attempt to hit economic targets, ports, airports, harbor, oil refineries. Nobody touched them. Again, an indication that neither side was particularly interested in going beyond a certain point.
From it, we have the difficulty with the lots of governments, from Israel to the US, have alleged presence of terrorists sponsored by another country as the reason for taking action against the country. How credible is the evidence that either the Pakistani government or the Pakistani deep state with the military was involved in the terrorist attack?
Well, it's very difficult to say, because normally intelligence like that is simply not shared. I know India shared what it called technical intelligence with all the G20 nations. None of them protested afterwards, say that this is a lot of bunkum. But I served on the National Security Advisory Board of 2 prime ministers for 4 years myself, and I know that normally the best intelligence you'll get on this is the stuff you never reveal in public for simple reasons of sourcing and so on. So I really don't know what the level of intelligence was, but I'm sure if Shashi Tharoor was spoken to earlier, he would have pointed out that the links between these groups and in this case, I think it was Islamic Resistance Front, in India's view, I think the membership was very clearly linked to Lashkar-e-Toiba. And if you establish that link, Lashkar-e-Toiba is 100% linked to the Pakistani military. It's been a very close relationship going back decades. And that's not a surprise. And it's a UN-listed terrorist organization. It's a US-listed terrorist organization. So I don't think that is a surprise on that front. The degree, ultimately, in these type of battles, my view is going for the intelligence on this is a pointless exercise, because it'll take decades before the actual intelligence is ever revealed. Ultimately, it's a perception battle. The Indian government says this is what we believe to be the case. Pakistan has a choice of refuting this, but notably countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, even China did not actually, these are countries that have traditionally been reasonably close to Pakistan, did not come out and make a demand that we need more intelligence, so India really should refrain. China surprisingly just said, we regret the Indian decision to attack the camps on May 7th and the terrorist sites. but did not condemn the attacks. And very strangely, the Chinese embassy was tweeting pictures of doves and olive branches all day long, and saying, you are both our neighbors, and we
Doves
really,
with Chinese characteristics.
yeah, we would like you
Interesting.
both to sit. You're both our neighbors, and we really like to you both to sit down and resolve this, uh, de-escalate and resolve this on your own.
Well,
Which I'm sure
that poses the
for
question.
Pakistan must have been very irritating. Uh,
What this has been a perennial conflict for what 70 years since partition, 80
mhm.
years. God, I'm getting old. Um, what how can a solution be realized if the government of Pakistan can come to any agreements it likes, but if the military and the secret services go off on their own sweet way, as they did over Afghanistan. I mean, we
Right.
had a complete anomaly where the US government was bankrolling the Pakistani military, who were then bankrolling the Taliban in Afghanistan. So, I mean, this is sort of wheels
And,
within wheels.
and bizarrely,
Who actually
the
cope with?
latest
How do
twist
you
is that
reconcile events?
the new Taliban, of course, has turned against Pakistan. They've now wooing India, the new Taliban regime, saying, we are your friend. Pakistan is our mutual enemy. And in fact, if anyways, Pakistan's bigger security threat is the Taliban, the new Taliban government, which has killed, last I checked from a Pakistani think tank, said 1,600 Pakistanis have been killed by the Taliban, including about a third of them being security men. Forces, and Pakistan has bombed Afghanistan. The Taliban is saying, are you joking? We just defeated the United States. You seriously think we're scared of you? But anyway, that's another story unto itself.
But
But yes,
it goes back to the point I was raising
yeah, yeah.
about.
So look, I think that yes, I think the Modi government in its when it came to power 2014 made a big change, a fundamental. There weren't too many changes on its foreign policy, I'd argue, from the broader Indian foreign policy continuity. Two of them were fundamental. One was on Israel, but the second one, I think the really big one, was on Pakistan, where it basically said that the tradition of the past 30, 40 years of Indian diplomacy regarding Kashmir had been to try to come to an agreement with Pakistan in which India would give a certain degree of negotiated autonomy to Kashmiris in return for Pakistan ceasing to support militant Kashmiri separatism. And that had been the basis of the Lahore peace process, the Musharraf-Vajpayee talks, the Musharraf-Manmohan Singh talks, go on and on. And each of them had failed in the Modi government's analysis when they've talked to their national security structure, because Pakistan internally could never have a consensus on it. That in the Lahore peace process, where Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and Atal Bihari Vajpayee had come to an agreement, who undermined it? General Musharraf, because he felt that this was a deal that was unacceptable to the military. Then when Musharraf comes to power, he takes over, seizes power. He then comes to an agreement with Manmohan Singh, which is then overthrown because he gets overthrown by a civilian protest, not specifically about the peace process, but about him in general. But the new government and the new military leader, Kayani, who come to power after him, killed the agreement. They said, forget it. That was Musharraf's baby. So if you look, so the Indians, Modi basically comes and said, this doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to waste my time and waste my political capital on keep doing a peace process which gets us nowhere, because Pakistan cannot decide. Now you can argue whether or not that was the process to be, but he basically concluded that was the policy he would take. And to be fair, he's been remarkably successful in it. He's basically done a unilateral solution as far as on the Indian Kashmiri side, and we can go into that. And partly because Pakistan itself has lost a lot of its geopolitical clout with the American withdrawal and generally its decline, as I said, relative decline to India and to other countries as well. It no longer is able to put that kind of pressure on India on the international front, clearly lacking in almost anything on the economic front, and very limited, increasingly finding it more difficult to even carry out supporting militancy, because of 9/11 and the shift that takes place internationally in tolerance for such activities, which made it much more difficult for Pakistan in many ways to carry this out.
But then we're back to this circle back to the sort of core problem, which has been ignored, is the status of Kashmir, and
Right.
tangential to that is the water agreements, which Modi has now ripped up, almost
Okay. So
possibly
that's a yeah.
guaranteeing future
Right.
conflict. But as long as the issue of Kashmir itself isn't solved, then this is going to be a festering wound. And I don't think the Kashmiris, I don't think, want to be part of an Islamic Pakistan necessarily. I've always found them to be fairly secular Muslims whenever I've been there. It would ruin
They're
their tourist
Sufi. Their
industry
origins are
and
basically
alcohol.
Sufi. So yeah, so they're not really. So let's put it this way, and I'll give you my version of events in Kashmir. That should we say everybody has a slightly different one. Um, and I come from a part of India that is as far from Kashmir as possible. I'm from Calcutta, I'm a Bengali. But I've been to Kashmir several times, and I've been part of a long-standing civil dialogue between Kashmiris and mainland Indians, if you wish. But I think broadly, this is what I would argue has happened. So if you looked at the up to Kashmiris were a contentious part, a part of India from 1947, as you know, with the Maharaja's agreed accession, and a slightly sort of shotgun marriage that took place. But Pakistan took 1/3 of it, India got 2/3. Um,
And the Chinese.
and the Chinese, sliced. Well, the Chinese claim it was never part of Kashmir anyway. So
Yeah.
that was, and there is a case for saying that that was a slightly strange bit of British map making because they really didn't have any.
One of many. I confess, with my hand on my British passport.
But you sound like you're Gaelic. But anyway, but so the so you have so but anyway, so you had a situation where the original Sheikh Abdullah and Nehru squabbled with each other. You had a battle at the UN over with Pakistan and over this, but it didn't go anywhere ultimately. And a couple of small wars were fought over this. The real shift, though, I would argue, takes place in roughly 1984. Up until then, the game really was that India recognized, I would say the political establishment recognized, that it had to allow a Kashmiri party to exist in Kashmir that represented, if you wish, a pro-union, an anti-Delhi but pro-union position. And this absorbed, if you wish, the sub-nationalism sentiments of basically the Sunni Kashmiris, the Valley Kashmiris, the Jammu Hindus, obviously Ladakh Buddhists, and the Shia had no incent. They were always very supportive of the union with India. And in many ways, that was a policy India carried out with many other states. The southern states always had their southern parties. Bengal had the Communist Party of the CPIM, Communist Party of India, Marxist, but in many ways was a sub-nationalist Bengali party. And that kept these groups inside the union, even if they yelled and shouted at Delhi on a symbolic level. 1984, Rajiv Gandhi, I think generally is accepted, made a huge mistake in which he overthrew the existing government of Farooq Abdullah, the National Conference, which represented exactly that was the dominant sub-nationalist party of Kashmir, and put in a puppet government, if you wish, a Congress government, a GM Shah government, which was clearly illegitimate. And though he was Kashmiri, he had nothing to do. He did not represent Kashmiri sentiment at all. In effect, you had a pro-Delhi, pro-union party that was clearly, and that's where you really start to see the rise of Kashmiri separatism in a violent manner. The protests that broke out at this point start to build up. He then recognizes he's got a mistake, but then makes a mistake of then putting back for the Abdullah government, but under a Congress back support, which then delegitimized Abdullah. So he basically lost his capacity to be that force of subnationalism, leaving a vacuum. At which point you then see the beginning of militant Kashmiri separatism in its original form under the JKLF, the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. I remember I once had to moderate the JKLF leader Yasin Malik when he came to Calcutta many years ago, and had a long chat with him. The original JKLF was secular. It made it very clear that Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmiri Buddhists were all part of what it wanted as an independent Kashmir. It basically was, we want the non-Kashmiris out. We want to be independent of both India and Pakistan. We want an independent Kashmir. And that was the basic broad thrust of the JKLF and the Kashmiri militant movement for a while, but obviously is strongly suppressed by India. But in many ways, though they expected Pakistan to help them, Pakistan also found them a little too independent-minded and began to replace them with groups like first the Hezbollah, which was an Islamicist Kashmiri movement. And then when even that proved to be difficult, they began to replace them with Lashkar, Taiba, and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which are not Kashmiri at all. They were essentially Afghan Pakistan fighters who believed in the creation of an Islamicist Pakistan as well as one in Kashmir, but were prepared to act as foot soldiers. They got a lot of support from the original Taliban regime as well. So on one point, that was a real tragedy for the Kashmiri nationalist movement, is that it ceased to be increasingly became less and less Kashmiri, became more and more Islamicist, but actually ceased to even have its personnel as Kashmiri after a while. I think in the Bush administration, the then U.S. Ambassador Bob Blackwell was asked at a TV interview, he says, how many of these Kashmiri militants are actually Kashmiri? And he says, our intelligence is less than 30%. Now, the bulk of them now are basically Afghans and Pakistanis. And I remember talking to a British diplomat who said all our intelligence estimates come to the same thing, that it's now the Kashmiri element is shrinking and shrinking as Pakistan takes over more and more, and the Pakistani military really is taking up this because they find a lot of the Kashmiris unwilling to accept some of what they propose, that you have to kill the Kashmiri Hindus, you have to do this, you have to do Sharia. And they're like, that's not what Kashmiriyat, the culture of Kashmir, is about. And they're like, well, then you don't fit into what we're doing, get out of here. So you had that one trend, which eventually became a huge problem after 9/11, because this ended American support for even the idea of a negotiated settlement that could lead to an independent Kashmir. And you can read Teresita and Howie Schaefer, two State Department officials who wrote a book about, I forgot the name of it, about the shift in American policy in Kashmir over time. And they said it became increasingly clear that Washington would not support if an independent Kashmir, which they feared would become just another independent Islamist terrorist state. And therefore, you saw the international support, because really only America had the capacity to even potentially squeeze India hard enough or bring the two countries together, basically lose interest in supporting an independent Kashmir. So that was one element of it. But in many ways, as I said, going back to 1984, a lot of what India's entire policy after that had been to recorrect that original. How do we go back and change that original sin and get a new social contract?
Rajiv Gandhi's abrogation of autonomy.
Yes. So you had this entire game of trying to create a new Kashmiri party. Now, part of the problem that we saw, I think I would argue you saw over time, it's hard to tell because we don't have great polling evidence on this, and it's more anecdotal, is that partly out of sheer weariness, because of the sheer brutality of the oppression they're facing on both sides, and war weariness, and then the divisions that were breaking out among Kashmiris, many of whom, as I said, found the militants, their ideology unacceptable. A lot of the militants, the terrorists themselves, began to prey on Kashmiris. They would abduct village women and so on when they were operating in there. That you saw support, especially among rural. So if you have the Valley of Kashmir, you have the Shia I've mentioned, fully against Pakistan, very pro-India, pro-Union. You have the Hindus and the Muslims. You have a very bunch of what I'd call sometimes called tribal groups, who are also largely not interested in this movement. Then you had about this core valley, the Sunni Valley Kashmiris. Among them, the rural population very quickly lost interest in Kashmir independence. In many ways, they remained very faithful to the National Conference, the original Abdullah Party. that this was their party, they remained faithful, and their game was just leave us alone. That's all we want, both sides. We don't care anyway. We just want to be able to run our villages, do our farming, do our sheep. Very quickly turned basically neutral. They didn't necessarily become pro-Indian, but their view was basically whatever ends stops the violence is good enough for us. And we will accept the National Conference, our traditional party, our traditional representative, whenever they come back in some form. It's the urban Sunni populations of towns of Pulwama, Sapor, and so on, which remain the hotbeds of the separatists. They were the remains, very anti-Indian. And very determined. And at the heart, they were the main source of recruitment for what left of the Kashmiri
This
element.
is almost classic, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
the sort of
Holmes textbook,
the
yes.
extremist groups can successfully provoke India into repression, which
Yes,
reinforced their support. I mean, that's a playbook for over
yes.
100 years, as
But
the
yeah,
Irish, the British, God knows who else can
yeah.
testify.
And but the flip side is that this polarized this extremism, repression on one side, extremism on one end, eventually alienates a larger group of the population. The base of the support becomes increasingly radicalized and extremist and very militant, but smaller and smaller in number. To the point for them also that means a democratic alternative does not work. They can never win an election on their own. They have to be ruling effectively in a non-democratic fashion. So I won't go through all of the twists and turns about how this policy is developed. There's a lot of, but over a period of time, we saw, for example, in 2002, 2003, after the Parakrama crisis, the mobilization crisis, India and Pakistan, what India got out of that agreement, with that understanding brokered by the United States again, quietly, was the resurrection of Pakistan essentially allowing elections to return, a non-violent election in Kashmir, which brought back the National Conference. That was the interesting thing. You saw Kashmiris vote, especially in the valley, en masse for the National Conference. And this was crucial because it meant the Abdullahs were back. And that Kashmiris are saying, whatever their flaws may have been back in the 1980s, this is still the only party we hope will basically get us out of this situation we're in right now. So you saw the return of the Abdullahs, of both Farooq and his son Omar. Then you fast forward a little bit to this present government, the Modi government. As I said, they decided, so then between then and the Modi government, you saw governments in India repeatedly try to come to an agreement with Pakistan in which an autonomy package to be given to the people of Kashmir on both sides of the border, and India allowing in effect the Abdullahs or potentially some future Kashmiri sub-nationalist party to rule in India. And then, under the Musharraf, Manmohan Singh, Vajpayee agreement that came out, you actually saw the outlines of a very generous agreement as far as both sides were concerned. Kashmir is getting a separate identity card and so on, porous border being developed between the two, and eventually demilitarization, except Musharraf then collapsed, and his successor, General Kayani, said, I got nothing to do with this, and threw it out the window. So that was the real, I think, a peak of a negotiated Indo-Pakistan attempt on Kashmir. And after that, it just went downhill. India's view, this is a waste of our time now. The Pakistanis viewing that they could press for much greater demands on India. Till Modi comes to power in 2014. Modi, as I mentioned, his analysis or his team's analysis was the previous policies have been just a failure. The game now is to basically cut Pakistan out of the equation altogether. Nothing really happened on that front other than India just ignoring Pakistan until about 2016, when there were a series of riots in Pakistan over the death of a Kashmiri militant, Wani. What was interesting about that was Indian intelligence assessment that came back was Wani was not supported by Pakistan. The Pakistanis were completely caught by surprise that there were riots in his favor. But interestingly enough, their also assessment was that The Kashmiris who came out to protest or throw stones at the Indian soldiers over Wani no longer raised flags of Pakistan or raised slogans in favor of Pakistan. They either raised them in favor of the Islamic State or simply an independent Kashmir. And so between 2016 and 2019, this was effectively explored, if you wish, by the Indian system. And the conclusion of the national security structure was that Kashmiris may not be pro-Indian, but they ceased to be pro-Pakistani. Pakistan has lost the support of the Sunni Kashmiris that until now had seen Pakistan as a savior. It's not completely clear to me why, but I think that Pakistan's own internal failures, a belief that Pakistan simply had lost the ability to do anything, and then Pakistan's support for increasingly Islamicist militant groups that had very little to do with Kashmiris themselves, or who had alienated the Kashmiris themselves. We can argue what are the number, obviously multiple reasons, but fundamentally it was this. And the key point about this was that India then said, well, in that case, even if we come to a settlement with Pakistan, it will be irrelevant. Kashmiris will still fight and protest because they'll say we have nothing to do with it. What you do with Pakistan is irrelevant. So in effect, at this point, in 2019, when Modi comes to power, the entire game changes. Modi's government's view is that we have to now develop an agreement with local Kashmiris, with the Indian government, and cut the Pakistanis out altogether. And this, in fact, also means that India gives up, I mean, de facto, its any claim to the Indian Pakistani side of Kashmir. This leads to the abrogation of Article 370, which is a clause in the Constitution. It's basically the agreement with Maharaja.
For Kashmir almost.
Sorry?
It's sort of that's the one that guarantees a special status for Kashmir.
It doesn't really guarantee that because it was put under a special section of the Constitution that said temporary clauses. In other
Yeah.
words, when it was put in, it was said that, yes, it's an agreement. It was essentially the agreement with the Maharaja, the accession of the instrument of accession that was signed between Nehru and Ning. But Nehru put it in saying this is not the permanent solution here. So I'm putting it under the temporary clauses of the Constitution. So then you begin a process in which the BJP government works out a constitutional, a very complicated and questionable, but the Supreme Court eventually allowed it, way to basically abrogate Article 370 and basically get Kashmir to become a normal state in the Union. The last step in that is for the State Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir to vote in favor of that. And with this last election, with Omar Abdullah becoming chief minister and basically National Conference coming back, you see the National Conference saying we endorse statehood. So at some point, I'm not certain when, over the next couple of years, we'll probably see the National Conference move. I think they're still trying to squabble with the government of India that we need a couple of more concessions of standard politics, but the trend is very clear. Now, in between, there was a lot of nastiness and a lot of carrots and sticks used. There were a lot of Kashmiri politicians arrested for a while. Some were released. There was an attempt to eviscerate the National Conference, but that eventually failed. The National Conference was simply too popular or seen as too much of a genuine representative of Kashmiri subnationalism for them to get away with it. But ultimately, it's come now to this state of affairs. So for the Indian government, the view is we have to do one more thing, which is basically get that vote out of the State Assembly in Jammu and Kashmir. And that at this point, Pakistan already has very little role to play, but we can turn to the international community. And I know that when I've talked to diplomats in Delhi, they've said that most Western governments have privately told the Indian government, we're not interested anymore. You just get that vote done. And at that point, it's over as far as we are concerned. India has solved its side of the Kashmir problem. And what Pakistan may say otherwise is irrelevant.
Mhm. It is still on the agenda of the UN. People forget there is still a UN truce supervision organization based on resolutions from 80 years ago that
Yeah, but as Kofi Annan, the UN Secretary General, is asked about the UN resolutions in Kashmir, he says as it was, they are now irrelevant. So I mean, the resolutions are there, but none of the P5 members are raising them, and none of even the General Assembly. It's basically not getting anywhere. What was interesting, in fact, I think in this present conflict, this the 90-hour war, or whatever you want to call it, even the organization of the Islamic Conference, traditionally a good place to get a strong pro-Kashmiri or anti-Indian position in Kashmir, basically produced a resolution that was quite neutral.
Well,
And
the last thing the Pakistanis want is an act of autonomy
yeah.
in Kashmir, obviously.
Well, they were in favor at one point. I'd say under Musharraf, there was a talk of that would be an acceptable part of the solution. But as I said, that was the high point. And since then, it's basically neither side really talks about that
Since
anymore.
we're beginning to run out of time, well, what about the water issue that
Sure.
Modi has flung in?
So yes,
Because
so I think
I mean,
that's going to be
this is a hydrogen dioxide bomb, isn't it? Dihydrogen oxide bomb.
well, see, but again, it comes to the disparity of power now between India and Pakistan, I would argue. What can Pakistan do about this? The answer is, I would say, very little. So you look at it as what has happened. So the Indus Waters Treaty, as you know, there's 6 rivers that come out of Indus Waters. 3 of them are controlled by India anyway. 3 of them, the Chenab, the Indus, and the Jhelum, provide 80% of the water for Pakistani agriculture, 30% of its hydroelectric power. But the headwaters of almost all of these, almost all the headwaters, I think some are in China, all come out of India. Partly because of geological reasons and partly because of the legal obstacles Pakistan has put up. India's never been able to do very much about the fact that it controls the headwaters, and that even under the treaty, it has the right to use some of that water for various reasons. But the geology is very much against it. If you've been to Ladakh and seen some of the headwaters, these are really extraordinarily difficult places to build anything, including dams. So nothing was ever done. Now, what is India's concluded internally is that after this, they were already moving in that direction, but I think after this last round of fisticuffs, is that we cannot, Pakistan can absorb airstrikes every now and then. I mean, doing this punitive military action really doesn't affect it doesn't make Pakistan change its policy on anything, on Kashmir or on militancy. Definitely not the Pakistani military. So we need to inflict something more substantial or be prepared to show that we can do so to Pakistan. So the focus now is, given India's GDP disparity with Pakistan, is India have enough economic leverage to do something damaging to Pakistan? Among other things, it stopped third-party trade, which are probably, I don't think normally there's a way to get around all of that, but it would cost Pakistan a couple of $1 billion in exports. But keep in mind, Pakistan's right now, its foreign exchange reserves are about 15 or $16 billion. India is a $690 billion. So India can afford to lose $10 billion worth of exports to Pakistan. Pakistan losing $2 billion is a bit of a hit. It's indicated that it may try to at least delay some IMF loans to Pakistan, but I don't think it really has enough votes for that. But the real issue, I think, is the Indus Waters. So they said so they suspended the Indus Waters Treaty. The World Bank, which oversees the treaty, has said, well, if you suspend it, there's nothing we can do about it. World Bank isn't really in the business of enforcing treaties. But what is the plan? So for what I understand, over the past 4 years, India has been building dams on some of the tributaries, 30 tributaries, I believe, that feed into these rivers. Some of them you can build a bit of a dam. Most of the others you can't. And India's been building those dams. Second, it's been building canals. I'm not certain of the extent of that, but I know they've been building them that are designed to divert the water from Pakistan into India. None of them have ever been used. Right now, India's been playing around with it. They stopped providing hydrological data to Pakistan, and they've been basically playing a surge game, allowing the water to build up in a reservoir and let it go into one giant It doesn't make
So
much
this is a
difference.
serious ace up the sleeve for India. It's not just a rhetorical.
Let's see. I have to see how it works out. Hydrology can be very difficult. Waters can be difficult to control, especially if you're going to divert the water into your own country. You could cause damage to yourself. Right now, because it's spring, there's glacial melt. There's simply too much water to control. The real test will be in the wintertime. When Pakistan is sowing its winter crop, there is no rainfall. Water levels are low. If you both block and divert water, this could be extensively damaging to Pakistan's agriculture. My guess would be in the first winter, this is not going to work all that well because India's never done it and they have to build a lot more things. Over the next 2 or 3 years, it could be decisively damaging to Pakistan. Pakistan has said this would be considered an act of war, but India's response is, we're too big now. You can't attack us. And you know that. So what are you going to do? So Pakistan has already said we'd like to renegotiate the Indus waters. We'd like to sit down and discuss this. But I think at least for the first year, India is going to see what it can do first and build up some capacity and then basically tell Pakistan, ever cause a problem for us again. And this is what we will do. We will squeeze the waters and crush your agricultural sector.
I think we're, we're about to overstay our welcome on Zoom. Um, so we need to watch out. To what degree will the actual Kashmiri domestic politics accommodate itself
Mhm.
in the face of a government in New Delhi that has not always shown itself sensitive to Muslim sentiments, shall we say? And then, secondly, is the question of the waters, which we should this
Correct.
spot for the future. Look, thanks very much, Pramo. I'm sure we'll return to this, and we tried to get through a lot of history in a short time. Um, and I should remind viewers, participants, none of whom asked a question, I'm sorry to say, but it's probably new technology all around. Um, Monday morning at 10 o'clock, we're dealing with our own problems in the US. The Foreign Press Association is hosting a briefing with lawyers about the ramifications of the current administration's war on the media and what it entails for foreign correspondence, in fact, domestic correspondence as well, but for foreign correspondence coming in and out of the US, where this is an administration which has not been very sensitive to media, and it's even less sensitive to foreigners. So the Foreign Press Association is in double jeopardy in this case, and we will explore what correspondence can do. And at some point in the future, soon, I hope we'll return with Pramit to continue and enlarge on what was a fascinating and detailed exposition without the usual jingoism. Because I tell people that in India, in particular, by Pakistan as well, Kashmir is the third rail of politics, but actually it's more like the 25,000-volt overhead rail if somebody really grabs hold of it and dares to say there are UN resolutions to be taken into account, or maybe self-determination is a principle that we should at least pay lip service to. Um, and that's something that, well, I don't want to intrude on your territory, but it unites both the secularists who see Kashmir as a symbol of a secular India and the people in Delhi who just don't like Muslims, I suppose, and think they should be put down. But that's my flippant take on it. I don't involve you in it. You can you can certainly dissociate yourself. A question is just, in fact, can we get this question? Our greatest concern is the use of nuclear weapons. Any indication that both countries are willing to accept international intervention on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons or the Hibakusha peace negotiations representing atomic bomb survivors? You can answer from it, but I think I would say it would be, it's almost pie
No,
in the sky.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, fundamentally for both countries is they're not recognized nuclear powers, because under the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, you had to have carried out a nuclear test before, I think it was 1962, to be recognized as a nuclear weapon state, at which point you had the right to have a nuclear weapon as well as to be part of the international dual-use technology proliferations, I mean, treaties and so on, like the Wassenaar Convention and so on and so forth. In effect, if you aren't one of those, if you would have to surrender your weapons to get to be accepted into the international community on civilian nuclear power. India, after the George W. Bush administration gave India an exemption, it didn't allow India, India is not a member of the NPT, but is exempted from the sanctions by a vote.
Exempted from American exemptions, sanctions.
No, it was global. I mean, it was the NPT voted unanimously to give that exemption to India, but did not give India membership into the NPT. So it theoretically can be reversed. And governments can have their own bilateral or unilateral sanctions against India and nuclear technology, which still exists in some countries. But effectively, the global holding pattern was broken thanks to enormous American lobbying, and resulted in a major showdown between India, the U.S. and China in that treaty, but in that conference. But that's broken for India, is not broken for Pakistan. Pakistan did not get a similar exemption. But India not being a member of the NPT means it is still not a fully recognized nuclear state. Pakistan is not even in that first step. This means neither country will ever sign anything that restricts their nuclear capacities unless they are given the status of a full nuclear nation under international law.
And no one can do that without including North Korea and Israel and
also, it's just the diplomatic effort is prohibitive, and at the heart of it would be that China would say Pakistan at the minimum has to be part of this equation, and most Western countries say Pakistan should not be part of that. It's simply got too many other problems in its political structure to allow us to give unfettered nuclear rights to Pakistan. So that simple impasse ensures that neither country goes anywhere beyond where they are right now. Israel and North Korea are another scale altogether that comes into the picture. But yes, broadly speaking, no. They simply can't sign. Neither have signed the CTBT. They have not signed. They cannot sign the NPT. They cannot sign almost any international organization nuclear treaty or understanding.
Okay, well, look, we're on that gloomy note of perpetual stalemate, teetering on the precipice of the Himalayas. We'll leave it. Thank you very much, Pramit. I look forward to welcoming you again in the near future. Thank you, everybody, and we will return to this issue. And please return on Monday to see to listen to our lawyers and to ask them questions. You know, have ICE been knocking on your door lately, foreign correspondents? So, once again, thank you very much from the Foreign Press Association.
Sure.
This is Ian Williams, and I've been talking to Pramit Chowdhury, who from the Eurasia Group, who has given I think it's almost brave exposition of objectivity in Delhi. Thank you very much, Pramit.
Thank you. All right.